Which would be law, where you think about big churches.
Yeah. Great. Well, hello, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome. Nice to see you all. It's a smaller turnout today in person, so maybe more folks will be watching the video today, but we had some winter mix, as some of the meteorologists like to call it. Rain, a little snow, a little slush. So glad people are safe. Glad we have the video for those who want it. So for the season of Advent, let's see. Johnny, have you all been here? You missed the first two, I think.
Yes.
Okay, so let me get you up to speed, and then you can whisper to Becky or something when she leaves you. We've been talking about making preparations, and so how do we welcome people to our congregation? I think our congregation is pretty good at welcoming people in general, friendly folks. I think we have a nice balance between making sure we see somebody new and reaching out to say hi without completely smothering them. And person after person going, oh my gosh, you're new. So I think we have a good balance there. Sharing the peace.
The most embarrassing thing is if you're the greeter and somebody comes in and you don't recognize them and you go, oh, good morning, welcome, and you find out they've been a member here for a long time. They just haven't been here for months.
Especially in congregations with multiple services, if you go to the other service and like, who are you? I've been a member here for 30 years. It happens. But either way, you're still reaching out to say hi and you share the peace. And so we're a pretty welcoming group, for real. A lot of churches say we're welcoming, but not everybody completely lives up to that. They can be cliquey, but we all have room to grow. So that's what the point of this series has been, is where can we grow? So week one, we talked about, I was thinking of Jake, that Jake will be coming back at some point. He's in a wheelchair. We've got folks that use walkers, wheelchairs, canes, lots of different things. So are we welcoming to folks with mobility issues specifically, or folks with various disabilities in general, anything from visual, hearing impairment to autism, mental illness, anything, like how welcoming are we, but specifically mobility issues. And what about our building? What about our practices? What about our language? Are we welcoming to somebody coming in with a physical impairment? That was week one. And then what I've said is each week I want you to put yourselves in the shoes of these of folks who might fit these categories, but we're not going to jump right to fixing it, right? That's our tendency, is to just be like, oh, I know what to do. So I'm purposely making you all wait, a good Advent tradition, and just sit with these things each week until next week when we'll brainstorm some things. Week two, last week, we talked about families, like people with kids and youth. Like most churches, including people in this church, say, oh, I wish we had more kids, I wish we had more youth. And well, let's stop and think about it. Are we welcoming to folks with kids, with youth? And number one, to even come in the door in the first place is a big deal. And then number two, to stay. So what about our congregation is welcoming, and where are the areas where we can still grow with regards to kids? Now, y'all, you weren't here last time. Do you have anything to add to that one in terms of what would make a welcoming place?
When Brad and I came here like once or twice, this is before you came, and I was pregnant for Elodie. And we enjoyed it, we liked it, but then I had Elodie, and then Ian came along, and I was afraid to bring the kids because they would have their nice little outburst, and and I tried to keep quiet, and I was afraid to bring them. And when we finally they started to get older, they were in daycare, and I was like, okay, well, if they're doing okay at daycare, let's try church. And I was just horrified because the acoustics, the narthex is amazing. You drop a pen and you can hear it everywhere. And I'm trying to be very quiet, and I'm like taken out, whenever they start to get fussy. And Marilyn came up to me after service, and she's like, we are so excited your children are here. I'm like, they were so bad today. She's like, oh no, we love that. Let them make noise. We want them to make noise.
But you're right.
And I was like, and I thought afterwards I needed to have brought them sooner. And I see there's this one family here that has a little baby, and I was like, why didn't I do that? Why didn't I bring them sooner? Because I was so worried about that. And nobody's ever said anything. Elodie wants to sing in the choir on Christmas Eve with us.
Cool.
And so I brought her, and I was like, well, we don't have a lot of members in the choir anyways, nobody's gonna really say anything, and everybody was very welcoming.
That's
They were so excited that Elodie's gonna sing with us.
Oh,
That's one of the things we talked about last week,
Yeah.
is participation, right? Like, even if you're younger, like, be welcome to try things and do things but that fear you initially talked about of, oh man, I can't bring them, they're too loud. That comes from someplace. That isn't just out of a vacuum. A lot of churches have that reputation, or through time, you may have been in churches where children were seen and not heard. That phrase came up last week. And like, oh no, I can't, the kids get a person. Yeah, we had an interesting situation when Liz was covering for Jim Berg at his former church. I don't know if you all knew that, but they used to be half an hour from us in California. Funny how the world works. And so she was filling in for him while he was off for a while. And so then our kids were what? How old were you guys? 10?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a couple times where from the pulpit or from the altar, I was like, but we asked the congregation if, help us, right? Like, we're all in this together. Anybody whose kids we had there, we tried to encourage, like, go sit with this family, give them a break. Welcome, hey, go up to people and say, hey, your kids can sit with me today, you can have a break. Or, if our kids are running in the hall while we're shaking hands, tell them to knock it off. Like, the whole gamut, welcome and everything. So, do you have any stories to share from that as a youth?
If you ever want to get a youth to sit with you, bribe them with candy. But
People are easy.
it's just really nice to like, there's like a designated youth row, like if you wanted to sit with all your friends.
That's right. Yeah.
And there were like busy bags or like just the simple things you could do to keep yourself occupied. And whenever you participated, they're like, yay, you're doing stuff, huzzah. And whenever you were a disturbance, they're like, you can do better, but we're so happy you're here.
That's like, thank you. Nice. Yeah, I forgot we had that pew, like all the kids would sit in one pew. I don't even know how that started.
I don't know. I think it's just because we wanted to sit with our friends and it just ended up being all the youth would come to one area. And then you guys took advantage of like, hey, let's actually make a youth pew.
Yeah.
And it was a little chaotic at times, but it was fun.
That's good. And All Souls has the playground thing up front, and a lot of churches do that. So, okay, that's something, that could be a welcome. Okay, so you get the idea, right? Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Will, for chiming in on that. You weren't here last time, so now you get the idea of what we're doing, right? What would make it welcoming? Where can we grow? Okay. So this week, okay. Think of using the right piece of paper. That can't be right. All right. Of all the different groups and populations in our country, what comes to mind in answer to this question? Which group are Christians most against? Or another way to say it is, which group of people would feel the least welcomed by Christians? What do you think?
Ku Klux Klan.
Unfortunately, there's plenty of places that.
Oh, I don't know about now, but it wasn't too many years ago. They were alive and well in Mechanicsville.
Yep. No, I wish that was the answer, but no, that's probably not it.
That would only be in the South.
Most folks probably just pretend like they aren't around. But which group would you say is the least welcome in terms of how a lot of Christians talk about them?
Muslims.
Okay, sure. I wasn't thinking a completely different religion, but yes, sure.
They're not likely to show up to Lutheran church, brother.
Maybe not,
But no,
but
I thought of that too.
yeah, we've got some things in common.
Yeah.
But I'm fishing here. I kind of thought people would.
I know the answer, but only because you told me that.
That's true. Yeah, I was talking about it.
I was gonna say maybe us older people, because we're often very opinionated, it's like, well, we didn't do it this way before.
There is that, but most congregations, the folks that are the most regular members are
Are the older
older
people.
people. Yeah.
Right.
All right, one more chance. Who do you think would be the least? Who might feel or perceive that they would be the least welcome in a Christian church? Because the way a lot of Christians would talk about this group.
Gay, gay.
Yeah, LGBTQ. So that's what we're talking about today. LGBTQI+. There are plenty of folks who grew up in church, who grew up in the faith, who identify somewhere in the LGBTQ community, who have been told they're not welcome anymore. Who've been kicked out of the church, excommunicated, told they can stay if they conform and don't act the way they feel they should act. been kicked out of their families, I don't want to see you again. Those things still happen. And so when you hear a lot of Christians, especially the ones with radio shows and podcasts and a lot of pull, boy, there's a lot of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric out there. I mean, well, first let me just say, how does that hit you? Does that ring true or no? Have you heard of these? Have you heard
I've
something?
heard of it, there's a denomination starts with a B. Big one around, but I have a friend that
Subtle.
goes to, and she said they would probably be asked to leave.
Wow.
You know, it's a big church.
I went to a church service at a Lutheran church when I was on vacation, but it was Missouri City,
So, yeah.
and they're very much opposed to that. I mean, that was in the sermon and everyone.
Oh, wow, in a sermon? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the ELC, it's got more of a spectrum. And back in 2009, there was a big vote to whether or not to allow same-sex clergy to be, or LGBTQ clergy to be married or not, or to be ordained or not. And that caused a lot of division in the church. I was in an area in Minnesota where one of the big pushbacks came from and started. A lot of people were very angry about it. And so there's still a spectrum in the ELCA today, although a lot of the folks, the decision was basically do whatever serves the gospel in your area, because people were so divided and turning to scripture, turning to prayer, and coming up very differently. I know I went through some conversations with that too. I've heard some stories, but it basically became structured flexibility. What's the phrase? So if it serves the gospel for your congregation, for your synod to allow for it, good. If it serves the gospel not to in your context, that's okay. Like they said, whatever works for you. Over time, a lot of the folks who were opposed to even that much have left the denomination. My home congregation in Wisconsin recently pulled out of the denomination over a number of reasons. I'm sure that was part of it. So it's still something that is in our denomination too, although from a pulpit, maybe not so much.
I have a friend whose husband was the minister here, and she went to court with her daughter because her son is changing his name to Sophia, and legally now wants to be, identified as a girl. And she said she really wonders what Larry would have thought if he was still living, because she knows at least at one time he was opposed to it, but if it had been his grandson,
Sure.
would he have?
Yeah, it's different if it's somebody you're related to sometimes. Let me share some statistics with you. Some of these I've had some classes on, cultural competency and just knowing who's in your pews and who's in your communities. And because LGBTQ folks are perceived as or outright said are, the church is against you. There's a lot of statistics on this. 7.2% of US adults identify as LGBT. And I will say, if we want to have more conversations on this another time, I'm happy to, but each letter LGBTQIA+ does have significance and meaning, represents people. Among Gen Z, that number is 28% identified. Among millennials, it's 16%. For some reason, Gen X got skipped over on this list, but that seems to happen to Gen X a lot. Boomers, 7%. Baby boom generation, 7% identify as LGBTQ.
But you notice the numbers getting bigger as.
Yeah. And is that because folks feel like they can actually say what they felt, or is something different? I don't know. I would lean towards that folks have already have felt that way before, but didn't feel like they could be public about it. I'm going to share a screen for just a second. This is something from the UCLA School of Law, the Williams Institute. They keep statistics on anti-LGBT victimization. LGBT people are 5 times more likely than non-LGBT people to be victims of violent crime. Hate speech, public condemnations, conversion camps, being shunned, being kicked out of their families, things like that. But the violent crime part, especially. There's an organization called the Trevor Project that tries to prevent suicide, self-harm. They have some statistics that say, let's see, I have to read my own handwriting here. LGBTQ folks are 9 times more likely to be victims of violent crime than LGBT people. Suicide is the second highest cause of death among young people age 10 to 14, and the third highest cause of death at 15 to 24, and the LGBTQ numbers. In 2024, 39% of LGBTQ young people seriously considered suicide in the past year. That's up to almost 50% for trans folks and non-binary folks that they considered suicide. I'll come back to this in a minute. So a lot of this comes down to biblical interpretation. A lot of folks turn to certain verses in the Bible. One presenter I heard of calls them clobber verses, because they're the verses that people use to clobber folks like, no, you're wrong. It comes down to also what do you consider sin, right? And what do you do if you think somebody's living in sin? Are they repentant or not? That theologically, biblically, that's where a lot of the debates have come down to. For myself, and I've grown and changed on this over the years too. Jesus didn't say anything. All the verses that get quoted, none of them are for Jesus. And what did Jesus do? He constantly went to the folks that were on the outs. So when I see these numbers, and these are not made up numbers, about victims of hate crimes and violence, and suicide and self-harm. And like you said, how would Larry have reacted with his own grandson? How would Jesus have reacted today? Because when I read the Gospels and I see Jesus ministering to foreigners and lepers and the unclean and tax collectors, prostitutes, I don't think Jesus would condemn folks in the LGBT. I just don't. Now that might be controversial for some, maybe even in our own congregation. And we could have longer conversations about that. I would welcome that. But honestly, as I read the Gospels, I can't be convinced that it would go in a different direction. That's me. For some, maybe not around this table, but for some, maybe that's throwing a grenade.
Isn't there something in the Old Testament though about playing with somebody?
There's all sorts of things in the Old Testament.
There's about 7 verses that traditionally get referred to, Old and New
That's
Testament.
what I thought I'd heard.
And I'd be happy to do a conversation or a class on those sometime and have a
But they're only in the Old
conversation.
Testament.
No, there's some in the New too.
Oh, okay.
But I'll give one example. Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Sodomites comes from that had nothing to do with monogamous relationship. It was gang rape. It was a town trying to assault God's messengers, and so God was like, "Oh, we're done here. Sulfur, raining fire." Right? In other books of the Bible, I think Ezekiel, when they talk about the sin of Gomorrah, they're talking about that lack of hospitality, that abuse. They're not talking about sex. So, yes, that's using context. Yes, that's using some interpretation. But that's how we understand a lot of the other parts of the Bible. If you're more literalistic with the Bible, that's a harder conversation. But when you look at all these verses that get pulled out, they can all be understood in context, not to match what we're talking about today. But again, that's not our conversation today. I'd be happy to have that conversation another time in class or elsewhere, one-on-one, however you want. But when there are groups that are Christian who aren't opposed to LGBTQ folks, who are like, no, please bring your gifts to our congregation. Please be a part of this. You are loved. Basically, they say, don't make it worse. Like when you look at the statistics, as Christians, even if you're not comfortable, even if you still have questions or doubts, or you're just not there yet, don't make it worse. Don't add on to the abuse and the violence and the feelings of self-loathing that are already there.
I think what bothers a lot of people is what you always see the sensationalist stuff on television.
Oh, sure.
The group of people that, are just angry at the world about not being accepted, and they have, every color hair and 17 piercings and 35 tattoos, and great if that's how they want to present. But I think
Makes some folks.
most folks are just trying to live their lives and be
Yeah.
happy, content people in healthy relationships, and bring it,
Yeah.
everybody deserves to be happy,
I'll
regardless.
tell you a story. I may have told the story before, but our neighbors, one of the many houses we lived in California before we finally found a place we could stay. We were there maybe a day or two, and our neighbor walked over and said, "Hey, welcome to the neighborhood. My name's Greg. So happy you're here. Did you members of a church? My husband and I, Ray, are members of this church down the road in San Luis Obispo. We'd love to have you, and it's a Lutheran church in Mount Carmel." And we're like, funny you should say that. We're both Lutheran pastors, and in fact, we're starting at Hope Lutheran Church right here. And he's like, "Oh my gosh," And they invited us over for parties, and we kept in touch. And they moved, and then we moved, but we stayed in touch. And then their congregation kind of imploded with conflict and anger and all sorts of ugliness. He's like, "I can't be there anymore." He came to our congregation to visit, and then he said, "I'm gonna go down to like half time. By any chance, do you need an accompanist? He plays piano beautifully." I'm like, "Funny you should say that." Our accompanist just told us that she's moving to Oregon. So he became the accompanist. He still is. He still plays piano every week for the church there. He grew up Jehovah's Witness, and he was happy to walk over to us and say like, "Hi, welcome to our church." But he was kicked out of that group for being gay. And he and his husband are really cool people and very faithful people. A deep faith. They didn't have Christmas parties. They had Advent parties. Right? Like that's how much more Lutheran can you get. Have a liturgical theme party. So wanted to be happy, wanted to live his life, he wanted to live about his. That's everybody can tell anecdotes, right? For each sort. But for the most part, there are plenty of Christians who happen to also be in the LGBTQ community, who just want to be a part of church.
And I don't think they're always on soapboxes. I think they're just living their lives, which is what people should do.
Yeah, and I know on the non-church side of things, like you want the right to get married so you can visit your spouse if they're not supposed. So you can get benefits if they die, practical benefits like that. So anyway, that's kind of the background I wanted to share. As far as Lutheran theology goes, sorry, not Lutheran, liberation theology goes. Liberation theologies are a branch of theological thinking and teaching that come from folks at the margins. So there's feminist theology, Black theology, LGBTQ theology, saying, from our perspectives, this is what the grace of God means. And the rest of the church can learn from this because, as we said, Jesus often ministered to folks on the margins. And liberation theology teaching, basically, part of the upshot of all of this is as far as our local welcome goes. If we welcome those who are the least welcome, then we can welcome anybody. So as you're thinking this week and pondering, we'll ask a couple more questions in a minute. Is our congregation welcoming? Keep that in mind. If we are welcoming to the group that most of the Christians, a large number of Christians in our country publicly say are not welcome, if we can welcome even these, maybe we're onto something in terms of how to be in the world. At least that's where I've got to over the years. I want to read a couple of Bible verses, and then do one other kind of conversation here. So grab a Bible. Let's open to Matthew 11. And with this one, I want you to think about, let me rephrase that, but with this one, I'm thinking about those rates of violence and suicide. And hearing people from a pulpit with all the authority vested in them saying, you are not welcome here. And in fact, what did they say? That
It was about a person, I still remember this.
an individual?
Yes.
Oh,
The sermon was about an individual who, I can't remember if it was a he or she, but was gay.
Mhm.
And how the pastor was able to convert them, or try to convert them back to
Yeah.
normalcy.
and that's part of it too. Like,
Yeah.
if you think that this is a choice, then yeah, well, let's convert them. But if you think, and the science seems to say this, that that's just who you are, how God made you to be, right? This is just, who would bring this upon themselves
Right.
by choosing it, right?
And some of those early televangelists
Mhm.
claimed that they could do that.
And there's some people who send folks to conversion camps, like Bible camps, to like pray the gay out, kind of a thing. That's right. Even more rampant.
Yeah.
And most statistics show that doesn't work very well. In fact, those folks end up kind of more at risk for suicide and other mental damage too. So keeping that in mind, go ahead and look at Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 to 30. Somebody read that.
Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
You might notice there, Jesus didn't ask for their insurance paperwork or their, high school transcript or their birth certificate. Like, it's if you're burdened, come to me. That is pretty foundational to me in terms of how representative of how Jesus seemed to operate.
He wasn't giving a list of what he considered acceptable to bring.
Yeah. The things that Jesus talked the most about and got upset about were like, whose tables did he flip? The money changers, like example. He talked a lot about wealth and poverty and about hypocrites and, what's in your heart versus how you're obeying the letter of the law. That's what Jesus talked about a lot. But when in terms of healing people and caring for people, even the Canaanite woman, where he was at first like, well, we talked about this one last week. Well, even why should you get the master's food? She's like, well, even the dogs get the crumbs from the master's table, right? I mean, and he says, well, then great is your faith. So that was usually Jesus' response, was recognizing their faith. Any other thoughts or comments on that verse? Okay. The other one I want to do is from the book of Acts, and this is one that is often turned to say, no, we welcome everybody. So this is Acts chapter 8, starting at verse 26. This is a little bit of a long one, but the whole story kind of goes together. So if somebody's up to it, 26 through 40 to the end of the chapter.
Then an angel of the Lord said to Philip, get up and go toward the south to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. This is a wilderness road. So he got up and went. Now there was an Ethiopian eunuch, a court official of the Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, in charge of her entire treasury. He had come to Jerusalem to worship and was returning home, seated in his chariot. He was reading the prophet Isaiah. When the Spirit said to Philip, go over to this chariot and join it. So Philip ran up to it and heard him reading the prophet Isaiah. He asked, "Do you understand what you are reading?" He replied, "How can I unless someone guides me?" And he invited Philip to get in and sit beside him. Now the passage of the scripture that he was reading was this: "Like a sheep he was led to the slaughter, and like a lamb silent before its shearer, so he does not open his mouth. In his humiliation, justice is denied him. Who can describe his generation? For his life is taken away from the earth." The eunuch asked Philip, "About whom, may I ask you, does the prophet say this, about himself or about someone else?" Then Philip began to speak, and starting with the scripture, he proclaimed to him the good news about Jesus. As they were going along the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, "Look, there is water. What is to prevent me from being baptized?" He commanded the chariot to stop, and both of them, Philip and the eunuch, went down into the water, and Philip baptized him. When they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord snatched Philip away. The eunuch saw him no more and went on his way rejoicing. But Philip found himself at Azotus, and he was passing through the region. He proclaimed the good news to all the towns until he came to Caesarea.
So why do you think this would be a verse that's turned to by Christians in the LGBTQ community? First of all, do we all know what a eunuch is? Somebody who's castrated or in some other way, a little bit different. Could work with the queen in Ethiopia and not be if nobody would suspect him of trying to sire an heir. That's the queen, right? From a different country, of a different type of, let's say, gender. He was at the temple. He was wanted to learn. But the way the temple was set up, unless you were Jewish and met all the rules, you couldn't go all the way in. You had to stay on the house. So there's your context. What do you think of this one?
Well, I think it's kind of like the general theme of Jesus going to the marginalized type of thing, where the eunuch who couldn't go all the way in was uh, baptized by Philip, was fully accepted into the church because he was either or. And while some people might have prevented him to do so, like how some people might not want the LGBTQ community, Philip saw past all that, moved by the Holy Spirit, and baptized.
Yeah, and the angel told Philip to go there. This was, and then my favorite part is when the eunuch says, "What is to prevent me from being baptized?" Philip doesn't even answer. He's just like, "Water, go." Like, action is the answer. So
He didn't see who he was, he saw a person that wanted to learn more and embrace faith.
they sat together, they talked together, they
Yeah,
talked about faith together. Yeah. Now there might be 7 or 8 clobber verses, as some people call them. Maybe there aren't as many verses that are like specifically about somebody like this eunuch, but different time, different culture, different place, right? So you turn to the ones that are all about welcome, that are about Jesus saying, "My burden is light." To me, that's more foundational. That's the counterpoint. That's the example for me. So when we say all are welcome, a lot of folks, a lot of churches put that on their signs. We've talked about this the last couple of weeks. Is everybody welcome? Right? So put yourself in the shoes of somebody in the LGBTQIA+ community. I know in the congregation I served, there was a person there, and everybody knew that he was gay, had a partner, they lived together, they'd host parties. No one talked about it because his family was pretty strict Catholic, and so everybody knew, but nobody said. So you were saying earlier you were afraid to come to church because what if my kids are loud? What if you're afraid to come to church just because of who you are? Or what if you come to church but have to pretend like you're not who you are? And keep part of yourself hidden from your friends and neighbors in the congregation. So put yourself in the shoes. Knowing kind of the predominant and public loud Christian attitudes. And that it's possible or likely that you've had past hurts or trauma from pastors, Christians, messages you've seen, or been excluded or excommunicated. So, okay, what would it take to cross the threshold of a church? If you're somewhere in the LGBTQ community, what would it take for you to even give it a try?
For me, it'd probably have to be the recommendation of a trusted friend.
Somebody else is there already. Okay. Anybody else? And maybe you can draw on your own experiences if you were just new to the area, or I know divorce was very stigmatized for a while. Would you be welcome? For any number of reasons, but if you have to tap into some of those, what would it take to get you over the threshold?
I think you'd have to do some research as well. I mean, that's how I found this church,
Mhm.
because I knew I didn't want to be part of the Missouri Synod.
Right, you had experience.
I was looking for, well, and I grew up in ELCA as well.
Yeah.
So,
When you come to this area, if you wanna be Lutheran, there's not a lot of choices.
there's,
So-
As opposed to those ones that start with B.
As opposed to the ones that start with B.
There's like one on each side of Richmond,
One what?
Lutheran Church, ELCA Church.
There are,
There's one, there's two on the
there's
outside
eight,
now.
there's 8 in the Richmond area if you count Petersburg.
Oh, okay, I forgot
but
about
what's
that.
a lot of Episcopal churches as well.
Yeah, Episcopal
Because, I mean,
churches.
it's so close.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Would you feel welcome here in the silence room? In terms of language attitudes.
I would hope so.
I know this part of Virginia is pretty conservative, so there's already a little bit of shields up. Conservative religiously, not.
Both.
Well, yes, but that's not what I was trying. Okay,
I think a person would feel welcomed because people here are extremely nice and everyone is welcoming and wants to know everybody, but to the extent of fully living out one's identity, I don't know, and that might just be more because of the geographical location rather than the people, because it's more conservative. What they might want to attend, they might feel welcome, but because of demographics, would it be safe for them?
let me read you a list here that you had a presentation about welcoming, so. Would you be welcomed by the clergy? By the lay leaders? But not necessarily the people in the pews? Would you be welcomed by most, but not necessarily all? Would you be welcomed by the people, but not the clergy? It's one list. The other list was, when you say all are welcome, are you welcome to sit in your pew and conform to how we do things? Are you welcome to be publicly out? Or are you welcome to be here but keep it quiet? Are you welcome to dress a certain way? Are you welcome to be baptized and take communion and be confirmed? Are you welcome to be married in the building? Would you be welcome? Would the pastor be allowed to perform your marriage somewhere else? Some congregations don't let the clergy perform same-sex weddings anywhere. They'll fire you if you do. Would you be welcome to be a leader in the congregation? Would you be welcome to teach a Bible study? Would you be welcome to work with children and youth, because there's still some stigma around that? Would you be welcome to be ordained or to preach, to talk about your challenges or your questions? Was anybody around back in 2009 when Messiah was going through the conversations that a lot of the church was going through? Do y'all remember how that landed? I know it's like 15 years ago now, or more.
I don't remember any big conversations here.
Yeah.
I know there's a file somewhere about that some kind of conversations were had. Maybe it was just at the council level, I don't know.
But I remember compiling a list of the votes for some of those questions, but I don't remember the results.
Okay. Do you feel like it was sort of a, okay, we talked about it, now we can stop talking about it?
I was surprised to see that, I remember that, there were more for than against.
Okay,
You know,
now 15 years later, the whole country has shifted, if you look at surveys and things like that in terms of acceptance. So who's to say where we're at now? Because folks are afraid to have that conversation. I feel a little bit like going out on a limb just doing this now, we're recording it, putting it out there, but I feel like if we're not talking about it, then we're not ready if somebody does come.
Right.
Or somebody's already here who is wondering how they'd be received. Because you don't know.
How do we let people know that?
That's a great question. And that's part of the homework for next week. We're gonna talk about all three of the conversations we've had. What areas do we grow? What could we do to signal welcome if we are welcome? How do we have the conversation to determine how that would go? Because for whatever reason, this is the one that makes people the most uncomfortable. More than having AA in the building. More than, and maybe that is a geographic thing. But yeah, people get enhancing.
I taught a lot of these students when it was the time when they were all coming out and it wasn't a problem in the classroom, really.
Yeah.
People were more accepting, even the teachers and everybody.
Other students?
Yeah, other students.
Good.
And I can say too that at Synod Youth events, it just is what it is. Pastor Dave always says to the small group leaders, be ready to have conversations. Because in these events, when folks are out of their routines, when youth are out of their routines and talking about God's love and acceptance, a lot of times you might have somebody come up to you as a small group leader and say, hey, can I have a conversation? Because they're discerning or they already figured it out and aren't sure how to say something. So it's, we can go around like nothing's happening, but these are our neighbors, these are our loved ones. Are we welcoming?
I think in teaching was like, don't ask, don't tell, that,
That was the military policy.
yeah, and I can remember there was a gentleman who taught in Elmont, and he was a math teacher, and we have these math conferences all over the United States, and most of us would meet to go out to dinner, but he never joined us. He went to the gay bars, we found out later, but, I don't know whether the people where he taught knew or not, but it was just kind of, don't ask.
Well, and for a long time, you get fired. Or in some countries, you get thrown in jail. Today,
I was gonna say today, there's gonna be an unaccepting cultures.
if we have this conversation someday as a wider congregation, how welcoming are we of folks with, it's one thing to disagree, but when you get into this conversation, you get some pretty hurtful things said. The potential of it. Are people with hurtful or hateful things to say welcome? Like, I was on the phone with a relative the other day, and it seemed like he went out of his way to say something racist in that case, just to see how I'd react. And it's just like, why are we doing this? So, it's about the University of Michigan coach, and like, we don't. Why are we doing this? So, that's another thing. Do you welcome? People say love the sinner, hate the sinner, which is kind of a little trite, but okay. Wait, did I do that backwards? Love the sinner, hate the sinner. I did that backwards. Whoa. Does that apply to, just saying hurtful things too? Like, how do we navigate that? Because people are very passionate and very dug in on this conversation. I'll share this quote. For all those we welcome, all people This applies to the first 2 weeks conversation and any other conversations we have. All people desire to be heard, to be seen, and to live authentically as God's creation. All people want human dignity. All people are looking for belonging, affirmation, to feel safe, to be part of God's ongoing story. If you believe in God, you want to participate. So, apply that to all the conversations we've had. I'll share one more thing and then I'll give you your homework this week. Have you heard of reconciling in Christ? Yeah, maybe. So there's a group called Reconciling Works. Oh, there we go. There's a group called Reconciling Works, and it is a Lutheran organization, and they will work with congregations to basically certify them as a Reconciling in Christ church. You can see it on their website, on their signage, and it'll have some kind of, pride looking thing on there to say, hey, no, for real, we might not be perfect, but we're really trying to welcome everybody. This would be a safe place. So that would be one answer to the question, how would folks know? Well, if the congregation wanted to go this direction, and I'm not saying they do, just saying here's a resource. It's got all sorts of stuff on there, and it basically certifies you. Now, you put something like a rainbow heart on your building in Hanover County, you might have some visitors come and take issue with that. I've heard some stories. I've heard that the high schools in Hanover can be a tough place to be. I've heard that from some other clergy. I'm talking to their youth that it can be a tough place to be LGBTQ in the high schools here. Yeah, anecdotal, but that is a resource that is out there. Now, comparing our conversation today to weeks 1 and 2, talking about mobility issues or having kids and youth a little safer, a little more accessible, more people are like, oh yeah, I've had to use a walker, my dad had a cane, I had kids, I have kids, right? Not as much conversation around the table today. Now we got less people, but your homework is to kind of go to, was it Johnny who said, how would people know? Like, okay, I want you to think, maybe even have conversations with your friends and neighbors, like, look up some of these statistics on your own, the websites or the Williams Project at UCLA Law and the Trevor Project. There's also this thing, I look it up. There's another organization called, let's see if I remember what it's called. I'll find it, but there's a whole organization that's trying to say like, hey, no, there are safe places for you. There are Christian communities that want your gifts, that want to be, want you to be a part of their community. Same thing as the other 2 weeks. Put yourself in the shoes of somebody with mobility issues, somebody hauling their kids around and they're popping all over the place, teenagers, LGBTQ community. How welcoming is our congregation? What conversations, what growing edges are we willing to address? And next week, that's what we'll do. We'll talk, about practical side. Right? These 3 weeks are supposed to get you thinking. But yeah, as you're sitting in the pews today in worship, look around, look at the words in the bulletin, look at the people around you. For all the groups we've talked about and many others, how fully welcome are they? Where can we grow? That's the Advent homework, is making preparations. Final thoughts? Comments, questions?
We definitely need to do something for Irma. She cannot hear the sermons. Well, she sits in front of me and she has the FM radio thing and she'll put it in her ear, it squeals and she throws it down and just sits there and looks at everybody else for cues of what to do and when to stand up. And I know she's not hearing a word, it bothers me.
She had a little mic that she was having me put on and she stopped bringing it out.
What she's got, because even when we got to breakfast, she has this little mic she puts between the two of us. And if we're sitting, just like Becky and I, we could pretty well communicate. But she goes to the best specialist. I have heard, if you have no hearing left, a hearing aid is not gonna help. And she basically is to the point where she has no hearing left.
I talked to her on the phone the other day and she's got a Bluetooth thing that helps. And
Yeah.
that was fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, apply that to everybody, okay? If you're here and you can't physically hear, how do you get the word? If you're here with kids jumping around, or you're afraid to come, because you're afraid your kids will, not be welcomed or be noisy or whatever, well, how are you gonna hear the word? If
If we
you,
post your sermon on the board up there and let her read.
I know she reads it after the fact, I mean, and then if you feel like you can't be yourself, or that it wouldn't be safe, how are you gonna hear the word? How are you gonna experience, the fullness of Christian community if you can't be the fullness of you? For whatever reason. So that's your homework. Get uncomfortable. Sit with these things. Look to Jesus who said, "If your burden's heavy, come to me." And what did he do? He went and sat and ate with people that got him in trouble, and he touched people he wasn't supposed to touch, and healed on the day he wasn't supposed to heal on. Like, he did all sorts of stuff that would have made people uncomfortable. So that's your homework. Be uncomfortable. Think about this stuff this week, and next week we'll start finally moving to the more practical. What do we do? All right, thanks, everybody.
You're gonna be first line assistant for everything?